Are you ready to elevate your poker tournament game and see immediate results? We're talking lightning fast. In fact, let's just throw out GTO and exploitative poker completely out the window and do exactly what is in this video. Well, technically, you're not going to throw it out, but what you're going to do is learn a framework for being able to integrate the most complex theories that are in poker and do it in a simple framework. And this video series is going to walk you step by step on how to do it simply and rapidly. Let's go. I've been super excited to bring you this bootcamp series since I started this YouTube channel. And what we have here is a compressed version of 2 decades worth of screwing up, failing, doing well, hiring coaches, firing coaches, working with groups, reading books, and playing millions of hands of poker compressed down into the fastest way that you can get wildly profitable as quickly, but also in as short and as little amount of work and time as you possibly can. Now, there's a few steps that you're going to need to do immediately in order to be profitable and successful at this actual theory. We're going to call it the integrative poker theory. It's taking and blending GTO and exploitative strategies together and integrating them into a manner of play that you can apply at any stakes. So even if you're a brand new beginner, which, oh my goodness, I wish I had this bootcamp course when I first started, or even a seasoned professional that's trying to figure out how to deviate from GTO or to integrate GTO into an exploitative play, or just catch up with the modern game, this is the bootcamp and the framework that's going to do it for you. The integrative poker theory. Remember, Zach the Tiburon Marcy coined that term here first. Now, here are the steps that you need to take in order to maximize this video series and up-level your game as quickly as possible. First thing I need you to do, which you know everybody asks this on YouTube, like and make sure that you subscribe right down below. Go ahead, do that. You know it's going to help me with producing more content like this. But after that, I need you, actually I'll wait for you. Cool, now that you've done that, down below in the comment section, I need you to commit into a contract between you and I need you to say, I'm in. That's it. Just say, I'm in. You have committed to following through on this as a step-by-step process to uplevel your game. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I guarantee I could charge hundreds, maybe $1,000 for this course and probably get really good results from people. And they might take it more serious. Please, when you say I'm in, commit to doing this all the way through. And understand, just because you're getting this free doesn't mean it isn't valuable. In fact, this is responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars from me in my poker career cashes. Actually, probably even more than that. Probably had around $500,000 in poker cashes in my poker career. And you're going to get it here in this bootcamp series. Once you have said I'm in, that's it. You've committed to going at least 4 weeks, step by step through this boot camp and integrating these strategies into your game and doing the homework that is attached to each section. Then click the link down below in my Discord server. Now, you're going to see inside of my Discord server, Fast Poker Wins Boot Camp. Fast Poker Wins Boot Camp. Once you see that, get in there, introduce yourself, tag me in an introduction, and I'm going to match and see that you've already said that you're all in, and I'm going to personally coach you through this entire 4 weeks of this boot camp. You're going to be able to get hand history reviews. You're going to be able to learn the study strategies that we're utilizing for GTO ranges. You're going to learn how to tag players in your exploitative typing. You're going to learn how to do hand reading and then integrate it all together. You'll get put into the group. But you got to do those things first, and then let's jump straight in. Boost your poker tournament wins fast. Boot camp edition for low and mid stakes. I originally was just going to do these 3 strategies in one video and realized if you're really going to create a dynamic inside of your poker game that improves you step by step, that you can repeat over and over and turn into a really profitable poker passion, then these tips I'm going to cover immediately. That way you can apply them. But then I'm going to get more granular, and you can go through this step by step and really make this a part of your game. I have spent 25 years taking all of this information that you're going to get inside of here and turning it into a process where I can repeat it over and over, but I can also analyze my game post-game to figure out where I'm falling short, plug leaks, and understand how to get better progressively. Best thing for you to do right now, if you haven't liked and subscribed, go ahead. You'll get on the list and notifications as I produce more of these videos. But most important, open up a Google Doc or grab a pen and paper, because we're going to set not just passive learning, but active learning. And active learning is where you are a participant that is going and doing as you are learning. You set new neurological pathways. In other words, you make your brain go, okay, you know what? I'm really learning this, and I can apply it the next time that I am in the context of what I'm going to apply it in. As you are writing these down, thinking this through, and doing the homework where you're applying it, and doing pre-game and post-game notes, you're going to turn this into your actual game. So it isn't just the theory and understanding, but it's being able to utilize it when the pressure's on, when the time bank's clicking down, when your opponent that's a nit tag lag, Maniac or Calling Station, is up against your bottom end of your range, and you figure out based on the hand reading as to whether or not you're going to call or not. All of that sounds very complex, but it's actually pretty simple. And I'm going to break this down into a way that's very simple for you, but you got to put in the work where you're doing your homework and not just passively absorbing this, but actively absorbing this. Go ahead, hit pause, go open up your Google Sheet, or go find your pen and paper, or even grab your telephone and open up a notepad on there, and let's get cracking. Now that you're back, let's jump into this. So boosting your poker wins fast are going to be around 3 different strategies, and they are nailing down your GTO ranges, understanding what's at where you're going to start your opening of your hands at each stack depth, and adjusting as the dynamics change in the game. Then, once you've got those nailed down, understanding the player types and how you're going to deviate your play based on whether or not they're a nit, a tight aggressive player, a lag or a loose aggressive player, a maniac or a calling station. And we're going to start with the tendencies of each one of these player populations. Then, as you're taking notes and really paying attention to showdowns, you're going to then adjust your play against these players based on their actual tendencies and that person in particular. Once you've done those 2 things and nailed that down, we're then really going to drive into hand reading, understanding what GTO range you have, what a type of player that you're going to exploit might have, and how they change from pre-flop, flop, turn, and river. And as the boards change, you're going to do and understand what they might have, how you might need to play, and what to do each step of the way. This stuff can be incredibly difficult, but we're going to make this really simple. And get into my Discord server down below. I will walk you through, as you're going through this, I will walk you through the questions that you may have and answer or even help you get established as a better poker player faster. So jump into Discord, Now let's jump into this. So the first thing everybody needs to nail down, whether you're just starting, whether you can't figure out why you've been playing for a really long time and just can't get it right. And by the way, this happened to me. If you look at my own shark scope, let's say on global poker in particular, I had some very big wins very quickly in 2018. I'd come back to the game after like a 2-year layoff. Actually, I was playing live, but I was playing live cash, not many tournaments. I came back, I had these booming wins. And the next thing I know, I take a little bit of a time away, come back, and I can't crack the game anymore. And I don't know why. And it was the difference between people really having GTO ranges at their disposal and not. So some of these regs were getting in there and understanding how to play at different stack depths and how to play as the game dynamics changed. But I hadn't changed yet. So I'm still winning, but at a significantly lower rate. It required me to take all of my exploitative poker exploits, all of the things that I thought I knew that I applied for the last 20 years, and up level my current game to the level that others were playing, and then adding back in all of my other dynamics that you're going to learn, like exploiting players. The solver area is here, and you have to understand pre-flop, almost all of the game dynamics have been solved, and we understand the best starting hands that are winning money at each stack depth as poker tournaments go on. Post-flop, we haven't quite gotten there yet, but if there's one change that I get any player to make immediately that will boost their win rate fast, this is what you came here for, is nailing down your GTO ranges with each stack depth. So throwing on the old glasses so I can actually read what I'm doing here. As you see here, this is chip value. And by the way, GTO, for those of you that don't know, is game theory optimal, or it is the most unexploitable ideal way to play poker based on what AI outputs over millions of hands have figured out. So with that said, when you're just starting off in a poker tournament and there is no money implication, we look at just chip value per what each starting hand is. So my 50 big blind stack at chip EV is going to open under the gun, which is the very first person to act on a poker table at a 9-player table, would be this range. As you see here, 4s are in there, some suited connectors are in there, but you don't see a lot of the more deeper suited kings, or, we even shave off a couple of these offsuit aces and one of these suited aces. Here, when we're deeper, we have a greater likelihood of being able to get to a river and seeing the things like suited connectors transpire into really big hands. And because we have more likelihood of getting to a river, the other hands have a less greater likelihood of holding up and in value as we go. That's how solvers have figured out these game dynamics. So when the stack depths change, we change the type of hands that we have. That sounds pretty complex, but it's actually easy when I give you a couple of solutions on how to look over these things and test them. So here we are where ICM, or the independent chip model, which says, okay, I'm near the money bubble. My stack is worth more in monetary value than it was when I'm just starting off in the game. I need to adjust to account for that dynamic. You are actually going to wind up making more money, staying in the tournament longer, and realizing more value with your chips and holding on to them as opposed to trying to accumulate them, unlike where your approach should be at the beginning of a tournament. And I know there's a lot of nuance behind that, and I'm trying to make this as simple as possible with as many truisms as possible. So here, as you see in GTO Wizard, we have a solved spot for under the gun at 25 big blinds near the money bubble with ICM pressure, not just chip EV. And this is how it changes. We start seeing, we add in the King 7 suited, we add in the Ace Deuce suited, we add in the Ace 9 off, but then we take out all of these little suited connectors and we go from all the way down of 4s being in there to sometimes we only add in 5s. And that's a mix. In all honesty, at 25 big blinds, I am 7s plus. Just as an FYI. 6s don't normally make it in until I get to under the gun too. So understanding that you need to start drilling and understanding as your stack depth changes what your starting range hands should be. Utilizing, I have a link right down below. Yes, it's an affiliate link. Yes, I do make money off of it, but it's pennies on the dollar. GTO Wizard gives you each solution of GTO range at each stack depth on what you should be playing. Go this next week and just jump in, get the free version of GTO Wizard, and use that link right down below. Go ahead and sign up for it now. There is some free solves in there, and start looking at what your GTO preflop ranges should be as your stack depths change. And instead of trying to memorize the entire board, the easiest thing to do is just kind of memorize the perimeter. So I know at 50 big blinds under the gun, I can go as low as Ace 10 off, Ace 3 suited, and mix in some of these suited King 8s, suited Queen 9, Jack 9, and 4s plus. And then some of these little suited connectors I'll occasionally play. And then you can do the same thing and memorize. Okay, under the gun at 25 big blinds. Suited aces down to Ace 9 off. And I cut out 4s and I cut out suited connectors. I just go down to, let's say, 5s or 6s. That's that hard. It's actually that easy. Just remember the perimeters and what you can, the bottom end of what you can do. This will help you get profitable fast. This is a solved. It's not something you can really argue, but it's something you do need to commit into your game immediately. And again, I'm going to go through some different stack depths as we go deeper into this boot camp, but I want to introduce this to you today and give you the homework. That way you can go in and start applying this. So nailing down your GTO ranges, that's how you do it. Number 2. Second thing we're going to do is understand player types and how to exploit them. So once you've nailed down your unexploitable range, the only way that you're going to wind up deviating from that strategy, and usually just post-flop, I don't want you doing it yet pre-flop, I do want you doing it post-flop, is going to be understanding what your player type you're up against is and understand how to adjust your play accordingly. The player types are as follows. They're Nits, Tags, which is tight aggressive, Lag, which is loose aggressive, Maniacs, and Calling Stations. And we got a little picture here of a bunch of different types of players that you're going to face at the table. Love the Maniac here. Kind of creepy, drives me nuts, but I kind of think of that person when I'm playing online as being the Maniac doing crazy faces like that. We're going to start with the population tendency and then go into actual player tendency. Jumping straight into this. So actually here on the next page, we broke this down into 5 player types, and this is how I color coordinate them. There's some nuance to this, and when you start getting into different sites, you have the capability of being able to give a lot different colors. I recommend making this just this difficult and just this easy. Red is going to be for your Nit. Cyan is going to be for your Maniac. Green is going to be for your Calling Station. Yellow or purple is going to be for your loose aggressive type player. And yellow is going to be for your tight aggressive player. Let's start with the nit or the red tag. Their traits are they play too few hands and they aggress only with nutted hands. They play pretty face up, and it's pretty obvious when they have a really good hand. If you're seeing these player types at the table, take note. You're paying attention. This whole week, I want you just paying attention, looking at it and going, okay, you know what? This person has not played in 9 orbits, over 100 hands, and now suddenly they're coming in for a raise. That's got to be a nit, dude. Or this person has not called a single hand at all. Suddenly they got a maniac jamming into them, and they call off, and holy cow, they have aces. That's got to be a nit. These players are the ones that just don't play hands, period, until they have the top, let's say, 10 to 20% of your range. So when you're thinking about them in terms of range, they're playing like this stuff here. They're going to fold like under the gun. Their range under the gun is probably like 10s plus, and this stuff here. They are not getting into more speculative like wheel hands like the suited aces until it gets to probably ace 10. And even then they're going to play it passively if they don't hit. Knowing this, what you want to do against them, you want to steal their pots. If you have a nit in your big blind, you're going to be stealing their blinds all day, and they're not going to push back on you unless they have a really big hand. If you're post flop with them and scare cards come and you have some blockers, let's say there's 3 to a flush that completes on the river, there's 3 diamonds there, hits on the river, and you have the ace of diamonds, you know you're up against a nit, and you know they're probably capped right here at just top pair or middle pair. Bet into them pretty big because they're going to fold. The pressure, they just can't handle the pressure when a scare card comes. And when they start, this is very important. When they start pushing back at you, just fold. If you don't have the nuts, it's pretty rare that they aren't showing aggression without the absolute nuts. You can just exploitatively fold and save yourself a lot of money and a lot of headache against the nit. Next, we have what I'm teaching you guys how to be, which is a tight aggressive player. Tight aggressive player, we can break them down into 2 types of players. It's the bad and the good tag. Bad tags have a tendency to not know how to play turns and rivers. They make really big mistakes. Good tags, which you will be after this boot camp, know how to play turns and rivers and don't make as many big mistakes. They have solid pre-flop ranges. They balance their play across the streets, and probably the number one trait of a really good tag is they can fold when they know they're beat. You don't hero call on the river for all of your chips when you only just have top pair and there's a straight and a flush out there. Like this is just a really good characteristic of a tight aggressive player. Now, how you want to play against these players, you do need to balance your play. You can't tip your hands just too much, but at the same time, you want to take solid ranges against them. And when you have some of these scare cards that it makes sense that you've been bluffing, semi-bluffing, and your blocker hand gets there and you open up on them and ship a really big bluff on the river, a lot of the tags are going to get it, especially when they know your range is capped, which we'll talk about uncapped and capped ranges a little bit later in this whole entire boot camp. But for now, just understand they get it when you bluff. At the same time, they also have the ability to hero call at times, so you can't overbluff them. This is one of those player types it's best to play as tight and as solid to GTO, Game Theory Optimal, as possible. And you only want to deviate when it's a bad tag or it's somebody that has seen a bluff that you've tried to get through, and you played the hand exactly like you have previously, and you get there and you can jam on them. They're the only people that actually understand the story you're trying to tell. So that's how you play against tags. Let's talk now about the loose aggressive player that you're going to denote with a purple tag. Remember, just like a tag, the lag comes in both good and bad variations. This can be one of the hardest player types to play against. Most of the pros that you're going to see are going to differentiate between being a tag and a lag player. Personally, I do navigate between being a tag and a lag player. A lot of it has to do with how many chips that I have. I tend to be more on the good tag side when I'm shorter in chips. I just need to pick really good spots to try to play. And then I tend to be more of a good lag when I have a bigger chip stack and I want to put the pressure on other players, especially around money bubbles. Understanding that that's going to be the mentality, for now, I'd rather you lean more towards being a good tag, but identifying these good and bad lags. The lags are going to have a little bit wider ranges, so they're going to go a little bit bigger than the GTO ranges I explained previously. And when I say a little bit bigger, we're talking just a few pips more, especially when you're when they are in a good lag, when they're in a poker tournament where they're against players that are a lot worse than them, can start to open their ranges. Now, with the wider ranges, what the lag starts to do is overcompensate by aggression, a lot more aggression. They can also be very tricky. So even with nutted hands, as opposed to being straightforward and just betting them, they can tend to check raise a little bit more or be a little more trappy with nutted hands where you just didn't know they had already gotten there and they're waiting for you to catch up. This is a really good sign of a good lag, and they're the player type that you need to be really, really careful against. If you have a super good lag, and we're talking somebody that's just really seasoned, usually playing at a lot higher stakes, what you want to do is tighten your GTO range up just a little bit more. That way, when you're going into battle with them, you're going to be more at top end of range, and you're going to catch them slipping with a better adjusted hand range. You also want to check raise a little more often. You're going to notice that lags are going to bluff, semi-bluff a lot more, and you're going to want to protect some of your two-pair and your sets against draw-heavy boards by charging them attacks. Because really good lags are going to understand, okay, wait a minute, I need a good price in order to continue drawing, especially if they have like gut shot straight draws or less than nutted like ace high or straight flush type of draw flushes. They're going to be sensitive to you blowing their value to draw out of the water by check raising them. And sometimes these lags have a tendency, especially the bad lags, to not know when to slow down. And selectively slow playing with nutted hands, especially when you are in a dry board situation where they can't improve, you want to selectively slow play. Don't overdo this, though, because I've seen selective slow play really backfire. You want to utilize that operative word, which is selective. So let's go into the final two player types, which are the Maniacs and the Calling Stations. Maniacs, we're going to denote with the cyan tag. And by the way, I want to give you an example here, right down below, of a Maniac that had zero ability to adjust, and all they were doing inside of this PKO was bounty hunting. And they were doing it in such an obvious and very easy to exploit way. And I would not have caught this if I weren't paying attention. And it's such an extreme example, I wanted to bring it to the forefront. So I noticed that this player we had been playing for probably about 2 hours at this point, and they had a really weird quirk. They were playing every hand. They were flatting pretty much every raise with anything suited and connected. And I mean, if it was a 3-gapper, as you see here, what am I looking at? Was this a gapper? Yeah, so there's no gap here. It's 3-4, right? This isn't that bad. They're defending their small blind from a big blind range at, what was it? Probably 60 big blinds. That's a big pot. So, yeah, almost 70 big blinds. to a cutoff raise. Not that maniac-ish, but what they did after it was a heuristic that was really obvious with this person, and they had done this 3 times, and this was the 4th time that they had done it, and I decided, okay, I'm going to test this and just see. So maniacs are wild and aggressive. They raise and they bluff constantly, and they can't adjust. So I know this when I'm playing against this player. What I then did with this player being to my immediate left and making my life hell is I tightened my range, and I usually either would let them bet into me or I would check raise them. With this guy being to my left, and that's the adjustments you're going to make against maniacs, I went 2x preflop, and the board came out. Remember, I have the ace of diamonds, which is relevant here, ace king here. The flop comes out 2 queen 5. I have backdoor wheel draw, which of course I didn't know that he had 3-4, which removes my wheel draw. I have backdoor straight draw, which if it runs out jack 10, or I'm sorry, yeah, jack 10. Jack 10, I get there. I more than likely am good if I hit a king or an ace. So this gives me 20 plus outs. Or I could even still be good here on this flop because of the way that this player played. My ace high was probably still good. I also had all of the flush outs if it went runner, runner, diamond. So there's so much equity that I had here. And there was the opportunity to double in a bounty tournament way before the money hit, and in a tight enough of a spot where I had at least enough hands, 6 blind levels in, to know that this guy played like this and to see that this player had played like this in a previous poker tournament. So sorry for all that information. It came down to it. I'm going to bet my queen range here. So I believe I range bet like 2 big blinds, and he just shoves 35, 40 big blinds in, putting me all in. And I opened up the note, and it said, jams pretty much any flush and straight draw on the flop. And I'm like, damn, man, I've seen this a million times. Okay, I'm going to call. All that went through my head. I called. I had ace king. This guy had this. This is an extreme example, but it was all of these things that made the factors. I had a good GTO range, but I deviated from what was probably a really solid GTO play of folding, and I did it because this player type deviated from GTO. And I wound up winning, and I actually wound up doing incredibly well in this tournament, and this was one of those pivotal hands. Last but not least, let's get into the calling station. The calling station we're going to denote with a green tag. And the green tag player, they call everything. They almost never fold. In fact, with the maniacs and the calling stations, you hardly want to bluff these people. You want to value own them. So what you want to do is size up your value bets just a little bit when you have nutted hands, but do be sensitive to the bet size elastic player. So if a calling, there are types of calling stations in maniacs who they're not going to fold to you jamming. They'll fold to you jamming, but they won't call. But then you have the other calling stations who they'll just call almost everything up to like pot size bets or even oversized pot bets. You need to pay attention to them and scale your bets based on what that player type is willing to do. Do not jam on the one that won't call your jam, but definitely jam on the one that will when you have the nuts. Also, and this is a heuristic that you have to pay attention to because this will own you left and right. If you see a calling station who is super loose pre-flop but then very passive post-flop, suddenly wake up and bet on, let's say, a straight getting there or a flush getting there, and you know they're a calling station but they're suddenly leading, you just fold. They are so passive post-flop, they just call mindlessly. But when they actually wake up with nutted hands, they get scared that they're not going to get that value out of it, and they kind of do dumb stuff. and they will lead into you, and it's very easy to fold if you don't have the nuts. They also tend to do this with second nutted hands. So if you have the nuts and they're betting into you, you can very easily call off, and you're almost always good. So that's how we play player types. Let's talk a little bit about hand reading, and then let's get into how to apply all of this in the way that you need to. So hand reading is based off of how the player type that you have is playing against what the actual board is denoting. We go through the GTO ranges first because pre-flop, you understand the player type that you're up against, or you know what range you have, and you can start getting a sense of how that player type is going to create their range inside of what they call 3-bet shove with pre-flop, and how that would interact with each street and that player type as you go. Let's make this super simple and super quick because we're going to get more in depth in later videos. So pre-flop, you want to focus on what position you're in, what the action is. Like, was it raised? Was it limp? Was it called? And what the stack sizes are. You also want to narrow down those pre-flop tendencies based on both the position and also the type of player. So you know what each type of player is. Construct inside of your head a very loose, broad, what kind of range would this maniac be defending their big blind with? Okay, probably looks like the entire grid of the range at 50 big blinds, and they might actually start folding some of the offsuit junk stuff as we start getting down to, let's say, 20 big blinds or close to the money. Then on the flop, when those 3 cards come out, and based on the position that you're in, like, are you on the button and this nit who has just defended their big blind for the first time ever is defending at 20 big blinds, and they donk lead into you. They're donk leading into a very dry board with an ace high. What do you think that c-bet's going to tell you on the flop about this nit who has not played for 2 hours and they're suddenly playing? And by the way, I gave you this example because a c-bet on a dry board often represents a strong range. Dry board, I'll get into some hand variations here and explain what a dry versus what a wet board is if you don't know what it is. And you can start to determine based on the player type that you've already taken notes on. You do want to start with everybody plays like the average tag population until you get a read on the person. And then when you get the read, then you can start to adjust how you would play against them with your range and their range. And you don't ever want to put somebody on just one hand. You want to put them on ranges based on their player type and how they would be balancing their play. And then as the streets go on, you want to start narrowing it down into hand range, nut range, who has the advantage in the ranges. What could they absolutely not have based on how they played? And then by the time you get to the river, you'd be like, okay, dude, like, they're full of it. They can't have the nuts here, yet they went all 3 streets. This makes no sense. I call, or vice versa. On the turn, you're looking for changes in aggression as the board dynamic changes. Let's just say a flush gets there, or a straight gets there, or a flush or straight don't get there, and they're keeping the aggression really, really high, and it's a wet board, and they're trying to deny you equity from drawing. And you really have to consider with each street, ask inside of your head, hey, does this turn help their pre-flop range or their range with what they look like they're doing? Remember, when it's a tag or a nit, they play a little bit more straightforward. When it's a lag or maniac, you're going to have to consider, okay, this is just, they're calling and playing with anything. How strong of a range do I have versus what they should have? And then against calling stations are just going to call no matter what card comes. Oh, you need to figure out the best way to extract value with your value hands and play a little bit more passive when you don't really have big hands against the calling station, and hope to make bigger hands and get value on later streets. Then on the river, all the information's there. And at this point, based on the betting pattern, based on the player type, you need to decide whether or not, do they have value here? And is that what they're betting with? Do you have value here? Or does your range have more bluffs where you can bluff this spot against this player type? Or is this person just over bluffing and full of it and they have a lot of bluffs here? You want to be, this will print you money, and it's probably the most important ever. Be critical of unlikely bluffs. So one of the things I've noticed, if you can catch maniacs a lot, or just people have made a decision to keep bluffing and the board changes really drastically and they're still going at it, they've probably just made the decision that right then and there they're going to play their hand as if they have the nuts. But if it changes really badly and you get down to the river and you're like, dude, this makes no sense whatsoever, you can, as long as your tournament life isn't at risk and it's likely that they are really full of it, you can call and usually print there, but you have to get good at hand reading in order for that to happen. So let's look at a couple of examples quick of hand reading and how to do it. Dry boards are boards that have like minimal connectivity, no straight flush draws. Yes, this has a gut shot, or actually, yeah, it is. It would be a gut shot wheel or a one side wheel with somebody that has 3-4, because then a 5 could hit. But it's still very minimal in like a big draw coming out. It also is very static, meaning whatever hand you and your opponent are starting with here on the flop, as it progresses and it carries out to be more dry, your hand equities are likely not to change. So let's say you have ace king on this board and your opponent is check calling. You probably have, with top pair, top kicker, a better hand than them. Of course, you always can run into somebody that is check calling because they know that you're tight aggressive. They're check calling down with ace-7. So it's another conversation for another time. Or they have a set. But it's just less likely for equities to change on later streets on dry boards. Just understand that. Some strong hands that you can have on this board. And these are the questions that you need to be asking yourself as it goes and as you're doing hand reading. Like, okay, I have over pairs here like kings, queens, jacks that usually need less protection. On an ace-high board with somebody being very passive and willing to check call down with, let's say, I don't know, king 7 or even like a hand that could potentially make some kind of like backdoor straight, like 2-4, you're wanting to get some value out of your bigger pairs, bigger over pairs that are against players that are willing to call down with a 7 or a 2 in their hand. Strong top pair with top kicker like ace king, ace queen, again, they're very strong on this board. Just make sure that you don't run into the overplay of top pair and or of somebody having a crappy ace and being very weak about it. Let's just say somebody has like ace-4 here, which also has a backdoor straight draw. They're going to play it passively, and if you're overplaying your kings and your queens and your jacks here, you're going to get taken to value town and you're going to value own yourself. So just be mindful in each of these spots. Sets you want to really start getting, especially on dry boards, you want to try to extract as much value as possible. Don't overplay it, but make sure you're getting the value for them. Also, bluffs, what kind of bluffs do we have here? What kind of bluffs do your opponents have here? They're going to be high cards with backdoor equity. So you look at here, it could go runner, runner, spade with king, queen of spades, and you get a pretty good hand. You could go runner, jack 10 with king, queen, and get there with a Broadway straight. These are decent bluff hands to continuation bet with, or even hands that miss the board entirely but still have backdoor draws. So, potentially going, let's say 9-10 here with on this board with 9-8. And it's understanding on the turn if somebody might even have in the small blind or the big blind 9-8 in their range, and that 10 hits on the turn, their equity just changed, and it's probably better because they're going to defend their big blind or their small blind with these suited connectors. It's more likely to hit them than it is you. You need to be asking your question each time these boards start to progress. Does this hit their range or my range better? Is this going to lean more towards this player type's range and that board change going to hit them more than it hits me, or is it better for me? Last but not least, the value hands, the value weak hands here are going to be things like ace-5 or even 7-8. Last is going to be wet boards inside of hand reading. And we could even change this. Like, you want to make this really wet? Like, let's go with this thing being like this, right? So that's a super wet board. And when you start, the wetter, the more careful you have to progress without the nuts. Highly connected, offering multiple draws, you have to be wise as to whose range it values more, what kind of hands are in their range. And one of the things I see a lot of tight aggressive and loose aggressive players doing when they have the nuts on boards like this, they're going to let you, when they're out of position, they're going to let you hang yourself, or they're going to start getting smaller bets accumulated early and then suddenly start opening up with really big bets later on if you've shown that you're going to be sticky on these boards with less than the nuts because they have it. You have to be wise and really in game tape the entire time that you're playing and hand reading. What could they have? What do I have? What do they think I have? What do I think they have? And as these strong cards, which I'll tell you, I've went broke with King 9 on this board to Ace King that's pushed back on me like 3-bet pot pre-flop a lot. So you have to be very careful as to what you defend your 3-bets pre-flop with. Get them nailed down in GTO range, because this kind of board is going to hang you every time, because the person that's 3-betting you has a lot more ace king in their range than you have really good straights with King 9. And I've done this before. You've done this before. Let's start being smarter with how we defend against 3-bets. Also, 2-pair hands here need to be, they're strong, but you need to be cautious. So King Jack, although has a capability of getting there with a full house later on, do you want to be calling a pot-sized bet or a huge check raise to it? Or is it smarter to navigate from in position or out of position with just a check and progress to see if you improve as the board goes? Sets are pretty strong here, but you can go broke very fast. I would much rather have a set on a dry board than on a wet board, and it's pretty obvious why. Now, your draws, you always want to be playing these towards the high end, not what we call the idiot's end of the straight or the flush. Going broke here, let's say you go runner, diamond, and you have the king of diamonds, right? King 9 of diamonds. And the person is pushing back equally hard, or they're getting it all in on the river. Ace deuce of diamonds beats you there. You have to be mindful of that board running out, what the nuts are, what the likelihood that your opponent and the opponent type has, and how you're going to play it. And ask yourself these questions with every street. Do not play mindless poker. You're a shark, not a fish. We think through things. We hand read. We understand the player type and the hand ranges. And you weigh that up against the dynamic board changing and what you think it could be that your opponent has and what you actually have. A lot of those weak and speculative hands on wet boards, you can start ditching them. Things like gut shot draws and things that draw towards, like top pair that draw towards the bottom end of a straight. I can't tell you how many times I went broke with king 9, or on this board, queen 9, and somebody either has 2 pair or is already there with the straight. It's happened. You just be mindful of it. Last but not least, I know we've run a little bit long here. I want to jump into the bonus tip on how to implement all of this. So for this first week, actually, I have this down in the comments down below. So in your Google Doc or in your note-taking, you can actually just come in and write this down or copy and paste this into your Google Doc. But for each week, I want you to break each one of these tips down into the following homework. Week 1, start with your ranges in your GTO wizard from the stack size you normally find yourself challenged at. Personally, right now, I'm working on different board configurations on middle position, on an early position versus a middle position call at 15 to 25 big blinds. And figuring out the ranges of what my range versus that range would particularly navigate in. But for you, let's say you have a really hard time navigating bubbles of tournaments at 15 to 25 big blinds. Trust me, it's probably one of the harder pre-flop starting points of every tournament. And it's where if you put in the most time and energy into it, you're going to make more money faster. So start with a range from a stack size you normally find yourself challenged at. And each day, start, let's say, Monday with under the gun and under the gun 1. And then the next day, go to the hijack and the low jack. And then the cutoff, the button. Then the following day is what you're going to defend from the small blind and the big blind. As you progressively do this and commit this to memory, just look at the perimeter of that range and commit yourself to doing it. If you need to stay at this week for a little bit longer than normal, do so. Then, and only then, go to the next week, where what you're going to do is you're going to look at the table and you're going to start taking notes on all players. I want you to cut yourself down to just 1 to 2 tables at a time and no more, and take note on all players and give them a color coordination. You want to be looking for and paying attention. Like, don't be distracted. Don't have Netflix and poker at the same time. Instead, have get a good playlist going. Get 1 to 2 tables and just take notes on each player, and then color coordinate them, and then list the hands that they show down with and how they play them with their betting patterns. And after, let's say, 1 or 2 rounds, just give them a color. You can always change this, but just assess this. I am going to warn you, don't do this with rebuy tournaments until after the rebuy period, which is usually blind level 6. And don't do this in rebuy periods at all. Do this when players have their tournament life on the line. But you do still want to be figuring out some of these tendencies and nuances as to how they're playing their draws, how they're playing their hands, and as boards change, how are their betting patterns changing. Third week, again, leave it down to 1 to 2 tables at a time, but I want you to game tape all of the hand reading that you do at the game. You can go and get a free Twitch account and set up a free stream where you take 1 table. You are going to sit down and play and talk through each hand. You're going to talk through what this opponent might have, what his range might be, what they show down, and you're putting all of this together. You're still applying your ranges. You're still taking note on all of the players, but this time you're really focused on hand reading. And it's, hey, this range probably has suited aces through offsuit aces through these kings, through these pairs. And as the board starts drilling itself down and more of the cards start to reveal themselves, talk through what the play is, what your play is, why you're making those plays, why your opponent might be making these plays, whose range it is more likely to hit, and game tape this all together. Then go back and on 2x speed, listen it and watch it. Are you getting it right? Do they wind up showing down really good hands? Are you completely off? And what do you need to study? Did you get the player type wrong? Things like that. Then for the last week, still keeping yourself at 1 to 2 tables, I want you to start looking for how to implement all of this, and you're going to look for ways to bluff. This will make a huge difference. So you know the player types are going to bluff the most, and I highly recommend before you start implementing in a lot of bluffs for yourself, you only want to implement in semi-bluffs, not real bluffs. Semi-bluffs are things where you have removal from the other player potentially having a bigger hand because you haven't gotten there quite yet and they can't have that hand. So let's say on a board of 2 diamonds and you have ace king of diamonds, and the person checks their small blind and it's, I don't know, let's say it's ace of hearts, 4 of diamonds, 6 of diamonds. Now, it's a really good nut advantage hand for you to bluff with. Just remember, they have some of the smaller suited connectors that interact with potential straight flushes and also potential straights. But you have the nut advantage with the ace high nut flush there. It's a good bluff candidate. And going with a small C-bet bluff, semi-bluff. And start looking for opportunities to catch some of these player types, especially the Maniacs and the Lags, with their bluffs because you have some removal. That's it for me, guys. Remember, be the shark, not the fish. And remember, like and subscribe down below. I know this one ran right at about 50 minutes, and you guys are really going to be benefited from this. I am, in each subsequent week, going to start going through each one of these strategies in more detail. This next week, I'm going to talk about the difference between GTO and exploitative and how to start implementing that into your game and how to bust this myth of you need to play one or the other permanently. It's going to be very controversial. But then after that, the following video, we're going to talk about actual ranges and how to play them and what adjustments you need to make with each tournament level as we go. Then we're going to get into exploiting the player types, and we'll get with very specific examples on how they play and what their tendencies are and how to exploit them. Then last but not least, it's the hand reading. Hand reading, we're actually going to go flop, pre-flop, flop, turn, and river. And I'm going to talk through and show you real live examples of me doing it live as we go and see if I get it right or wrong, but how to start applying this all together. Then we're going to go through bluffing. And that will be the last of this boot camp where we are going to teach you how to make some really profitable bluffs and where not to bluff. And all right, guys, be the shark, not the fish. Catch you on the other side. Can't wait to see you in the rest of the videos.